Natalie, were you surprised as a feminist by the results of this poll that shows that young men, a third of young men, worried about the impact of feminism on society today, and actually 25% of women also concerned? This must be worrying for you.
Well, I don't think it is surprising. And this research was commissioned by Hope Not Hate, which are an anti-fascist group, and they've raised concerns about what this research suggests about where we are kind of in the popular space, and they've talked about how often people kind of become slightly concerned about feminism and end up on YouTube and get quite sucked into this quite negative, very, very right-wing and actually quite fascist and they're raising concerns about what this means for us as a society. So I think even those who've commissioned this research did so from a place of being very concerned about what this means for our society, rather than just kind of all the liberal elites have a problem as such.
Well, look, I want you to debate with Mike Buchanan on this, because Mike actually thinks it's feminism that is the problem. A cancer on society, Mike, really?
It's very much so. And I've got to say, men don't just feel demonized and marginalized by feminism. They are marginalized in so many walks of life. Men are being disadvantaged, and most of the time that can be attributed directly to feminism. Feminism has never been about gender equality. It's always been about increasing gender privilege for women.
Natalie, your response?
Well, I'd really like to know what he means by feminism is oppressing men. What does he mean by that?
Mike, what do you mean? How is feminism oppressing men, Mike?
I think, well, I don't think I used the word oppress, but it certainly disadvantages them in huge numbers of areas. So, for example, let's just take domestic violence. I mean, there's virtually no provision of support for male victims of domestic violence. Although it's known that in the minority of couples where the violence is one way, the perpetrator is twice as likely to be a woman as a man. And yet there's virtually no support for men, because
feminists. That's not true.
What's not true, Natalie?
It's just not true.
Natalie, what part specifically isn't true?
That every domestic violence service in the country now has to have provision for male victims of abuse, and that has had a huge detrimental impact on a lot of feminist services who are now having to support men. So don't say that there's not those services. There are services available for men, and it is nonsense to suggest that men are the majority victims of domestic violence.
I was talking about the minority of couples where violence is one way. It is the perpetrator is twice as likely to be a woman.
I don't know what you mean by that, and I don't know where this data is coming from.
Well, if you don't know what I mean by it, then you're just justifying why we presented you with a Gormless Feminist of the Month award a few years back.
Well, I did wear that badge with pride.
Why did you present Natalie with that award, Mike? What had she done wrong?
I can't remember. She comes out with so many Gormless things, but I think it was something to do with she lied on the big questions, and I picked her up on.
This suggests something about the level of dialogue that we have, that I'm supposed to be the problem here that is disadvantaging men when Mike is over there awarding certificates for feminists being gormless, which feels slightly, problematic, I would say.
No, the problem was your lies. That's the problem, Natalie. As a feminist, all feminists are liars.
It sounds he's very anti, isn't he? Don't you think that?
Well, Mike, I am surprised that you would say all feminists are liars. That is a very strong statement to make.
Yeah, of course it's strong, but I can justify it because all forms of feminism believe in something called the patriarchy. And the patriarchy no more exists than fairies at the bottom of the garden.
I think it really depends on what you're
if you look at, we have in our manifesto 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the state, almost always to privilege women and girls. And I challenge Natalie now to tell me one area, just one, where the human rights of women and girls specifically in the UK today are assaulted. One.
Natalie, is there any area?
Well, 80,000 women a year are raped by men.
They're not. That's the line you came up with on the big questions.
But carry on. Well, look, let me step in here because I actually want to get back to the point that we are talking about today, which is about
Yes,
this
me
idea
too.
of feminism. Because what interests me, Natalie, is this idea that if you believe in equal rights, and I'm often told this, it's often said to me, Dan, if you believe in equal rights for women, you are a feminist. And so as a result, men feel under a lot of pressure to define as feminists. Whereas I like to say, Natalie, that I believe in equal rights across all areas, but I'm not a gay rights advocate, despite the fact I'm gay. And I also don't want to label myself a feminist. But of course, I believe in equal rights for women. Do you think that actually men are feeling, men, and actually not just men, women as well, because Mike says that only 9% of women actually define themselves as feminists. So why are people like you constantly pushing us to define as feminist?
I'm not pushing anyone to define as a feminist. I'd much prefer that people who aren't feminists stop calling themselves feminists. So I think it's really problematic when you have politicians who put forward austerity measures which have particularly disadvantaged women much more than men, that they didn't wear T-shirts then saying feminist. It's something that's become a term that is being pushed on people that you should say you're a feminist. And I would much rather that unless people held the feminist value system, and actually I would say that feminism is more than just about equal rights. It's a belief, and this is where Mike would very much disagree with me and would call me a liar, is the idea that there is a systematic issues in the way that women are treated, both by men as individuals, but also how men and women experience the world. So the fact that the biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide, a feminist analysis of that would be that this is because of the pressure on men to perform masculinity in certain ways. And so it's not just about saying we want equal rights for men and women. It's about saying that we live in a society where there is disadvantage and we need to look at liberation for women. But Mike would very much disagree with me on that.
Mike?
I would, because feminist analysis, by its definition, is always absurd. The reason that the number one killer of men under 45 in Britain is suicide is reactive depression brought on by things like being denied access to children following divorce, and we know there's a big spike in the suicide rate after divorce, mainly for that reason. And I recommend to your listeners, Dan, that they buy a book which only came out a few days ago called The Empathy Gap by William Collins, and it's to do with the empathy that society has. This is both men and women. Society has for women compared with men, and it's a huge gap, and it's something that feminists ruthlessly exploit.
But Mike, how on earth can you say that men are in a worse position than women in society? I mean, surely you just have to look at things like the gender pay gap.
Mike doesn't believe in the gender pay gap.
Sorry, Natalie.
You don't believe in it, do you, Mike?
No, it exists, but it's got damn all to do with paying men more than women for the same job, and that's been explored. God, it must be thousands of times. In fact, there's a small gender pay gap in favour of women under 40, and I'm guessing wildly that Natalie's not campaigning to end that. I can list you many areas where men are disadvantaged.
I think we just also, the idea
starts very early. Natalie, please. It starts very early in life with genital mutilation, where the state for 40 or 50 years has been investing huge sums of money to end female genital mutilation, at the same time as it takes income taxes from the butchers who carry out the crime, because male and female genital mutilation are crimes under the Offence Against a Person Act.
So Natalie, given so many people are clearly worried about feminism. I mean, as I said, if you look at the results in this poll, even young men worried about this idea of toxic feminism, worried about men feeling marginalised and demonised in society. I just want to know, Natalie, from your point of view as a feminist, does it concern you? Are you trying to bring those people on board in some way?
I think we have to look at what this research was saying, and what it was saying is that actually the anti-feminist route is this gateway to all sorts of other issues, and the reality is that, and my argument would be that if a certain group of people have had privilege, which I would argue men have, that once men are losing some of that and are being challenged on that, they are going to feel threatened. Just like if you're white and you get challenged on being racist, then you might feel threatened by that too. And the reality is that is just a part of trying to shift the balance of power. And so I would say it's an inevitable consequence that people may feel uncomfortable, people may feel threatened, but I wouldn't say the fact that people feel that is necessarily representative of the reality.
Final question, Natalie, are you a feminist?
I am, of course, a feminist.
Mike, are you a feminist?
I'm an anti-feminist and very proud of it.